get through it. Hell yeah.
Nice.
Thanks for coming out, guys. Hell yeah. Welcome to another one of the design discussions. This month, we're taking a little bit of a step outside of the wheelhouse. And we're going to start moving into talking about combat. So, combat design overall, combat within very particular games from multiple different genres. How does it look setting up and creating meaningful combat experiences in tandem with other design principles? And what does that look like, right? So, of course, we had to reach out to really talented, amazing, exceptional combat designers to come by and give us a talk and breakdown into like some of their design process. And Bader has prepared something for us today. So welcome everybody, and thank you, Bader, for coming out and talking with us about uh, probably like a really great showcase, the best uh, the best student showcase I've ever seen for combat. Um,
Agreed.
and you've only gotten better since then. It's phenomenal. So
Thank you.
thanks for coming out for this. I really appreciate it. And I know that all of these, I know everyone here appreciates it as well. So yeah, I'll give it the stage to you, man. Take it away. It's all you. And if you have questions, if anybody who's coming in currently right now too, and all the existing people, if you guys have questions while Bader is talking, feel free to ping it in the chat, and then me and Nate will give you the floor during Bader's talk, so that way we can facilitate questions at a good pace, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so everybody can ask Bader questions and dive a little deeper into some stuff if you guys want to. Hell yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you
Hell
so
yeah.
much for that intro. I really want to thank Nathan Kelman and Kyle Robinson for inviting me over to have this discussion on Ember Point. Ember Point is a capstone project that I worked on. I was the combat designer, and I was responsible for most of the implementation and combat design on this project, ranging from enemy archetypes and player abilities. I had the chance to collaborate with sound designers, UI designers, level designers, and even mocap technicians. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So I'm just going to start off with the introduction. So, hi, I'm Bader. I am a combat designer, and I work at Studio Pixino. It's an indie studio that's comprised of industry veterans that have worked at Riot Games, Bethesda, and Activision Blizzard. I'm also a really huge fan of character action games. Character action games have played a really huge role in my career. I've grown up playing character action games, all the Ninja Gaidens, all the Devil May Cries, all the Bayonettas, and the God of Wars. I've really enjoyed the expressive nature of character action games, the way they translate character fantasy. Ninja Gaiden, you're playing as Ryu Hayabusa. You're a ninja who's really calculated and committed to your attacks. With Devil May Cry, you're the expressive, demon hunter Dante. You're able to switch between weapons so stylishly and so seamlessly, and humiliate your enemies with just good old fashioned. And with Bayonetta, you're playing as Cereza, the witch. You're very cunning. You have to be very instinctual with the way you dodge your enemies. And each of these games just has such a wonderful way to express character fantasy. So, these are some of my personal works. A lot of that Japanese character action DNA has been imbued in my personal projects. On the top right is Anchor's Deep. It's an action adventure game with stylish elements. There's Dragon Ball Demon Breaker at the bottom right, which is a Dragon Ball fan game. It was featured in Game Informer and Game Rant. And at the bottom left, some of you might be familiar with this video, with this game. It's the Berserk prototype combat system. This video gained about 131,000 views on YouTube. Chances are some of you might have stumbled into this. I worked in that combat system. And on the top left is the most challenging project that I've worked on, which is Ember Point. And Ember Point is a lot more different than all of these projects that I've worked on. So, first of all, let's talk about Ember Point. So, what is Ember Point? Ember Point is a combat-focused third-person action game. You play as a disgraced defector from a militaristic megacorporation, Gravitas, who is stuck cleaning up the terrible mess his former employers left behind, all while wielding a top secret cure for a gruesome disease. Yeah, so right now I'm going to show you guys a video demonstration of the combat system. Go ahead and take a listen and um, just take a look at this game in all of its gruesome glory. Awesome. So before we dive into this, before we dive into the combat design of this project, I just wanted to mention that this whole discussion is not going to go over the smallest minute technical aspects of the implementation behind Ember Point. So I'm talking about blueprints. I'm talking about how we implemented executions, camera behaviors, or enemy behaviors. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me privately or email me. My contact information is going to pop up at the end of this video. This whole presentation is going to go over a high-level discussion of combat design, what I had learned throughout my process, and the important things that I took away from working on a game that combined gunplay with melee combat. Gunplay is something that I've never done before. So Ember Point was a lot more different at the start of the project. So when it first entered its prototyping stages, you were able to use this sword called Nova, which is pretty much like this fire sword. It had magma. You could throw it across objects, detonate them, and just retrieve the sword back. It was really, really badass. And you were able to use your sword to fire projectiles off of it. You were able to do these crazy combos. So you can see over here, you can perform these combos mixed up with heavy attacks and medium attacks, projectiles, throw, boom, explode, teleport, and do air juggles and everything. And it had a lot of that sense of, Japanese action game DNA. But then a teammate came up to me and told me, Bader, you've been working on character action games quite a lot. Let's do something a lot more grounded. Can help challenge you. That's totally not Edith, our amazing level designer and visual designer, who's also in this discussion, by the way. And she was the one who pretty much pitched that to me. You've been doing this for too long. Maybe you should try to challenge yourself. Maybe this is something that can help you out. Now, I of course agreed because it felt like I just needed a change. And that's when we started to have these discussions. And everybody in the team started to talk about the art direction. And these AAA properties started to pop out and creep in. We started talking about Resident Evil. People started to discuss we should remove the sword and replace it with a gun. And we were talking about how we wanted to exude a sense of horror. We looked at Left 4 Dead, we looked at Resident Evil, we looked at Warhammer Vermintide. And then in terms of the combat and how that combat worked, we started looking at Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, but what if it was grounded, right? And of course, I'm in the middle of all this, holding my head. I'm like, God damn, I am so screwed. These people have entrusted me with this system, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to pull this off. This is so terrifying. There's nothing that can help me at this point. They're all relying on me to make this combat system. Now, that's when our wonderful UI UX designer, Janelle Tanis, came in and told us, hey, if we're going to have a gun, why don't we do something like Dead Space? And I thought to myself, man, okay, we are out here discussing gunplay, but we also want to combine melee combat. What is a game that has that third-person shooter DNA to some extent? It's God of War. You're able to aim your Leviathan axe, throw your axe at enemies while you're aiming. You have aim down sights. So both of those things seem to connect with each other. And we all decided it's God of War meets Dead Space. That's what we wanted to do, right? You're able to aim down sights, use your gun, switch between your attacks with this giant pickaxe, and there's like this gruesome grittiness to the gameplay that we wanted to give players, like a sense of bone-crushing combat. It's gruesome, it's gory, it's gritty, it's grounded. Like the moment you land an attack, you feel like it's sunken deep into flesh and bones. Now, before all else, though, we wanna bring something that's really essential, and that's our combat pillars. These are the determining factors that drive the game feel and how we want to approach certain mechanics and what they exude, right? So Gravitas is a militaristic defector from a militaristic corporation, right? He has left this corporation. He has military expertise. He was an ex-researcher on this top secret cure, and now he's landed on Earth to sell this top secret cure to a buyer, and he crash lands into Earth, and he's a survivor now. He's trying to find that designated spot to sell the top secret cure. So we decided on these pillars. Number one, Gravitas is a researcher, therefore he is strategic with the way he manages himself. Second of all, he is an ex-military soldier, meaning that he has combat expertise. So he has combat expertise in both guns, and he's also able to use his fists, and he has martial arts experience. Finally, he's a survivor. Now, this is a little controversial because survivor is subjective. Are you the kind of survivor who's like Doom guy from Doom, right? You're this survivor that will do anything in his way to crush demons and just do his best to survive and just nail down enemies. The way he fights is just like a survivor. I will just nail these people down and I'll survive no matter what. Feel, right? It's that subjective feel. So it's all subjective with how we're describing survivor. Now let's get into melee combat and how These pillars influence melee combat, right? So Gravitas is a survivor. We want something grounded, gritty, and brutal. How do we fulfill that? Let's get deep into the field. Now, before all else, let's bring something that's really essential. There's a big misconception. Usually, I've noticed that attack trails and visuals, sometimes in pseudo projects, are based on how cool they look over the purpose that they should be serving in combat. The purpose of visual effects are to help communicate the bounds of an attack in the most efficient way based on gameplay, timing, shape, contrast, and color. Feel might be a gut instinct, but to nail it down properly, you need to understand the purpose behind the visuals you pick and why they're good. This is a quote from my mentor, Alex Brzee, who's also my instructor. Clarity is the currency of design, right? So you have a lot of things that go into communicating an attack and how clear it is, or an enemy attack and how clear it is. You have the visual effects. Do they communicate the balance properly? How long does it take to communicate that, right? Or how long does it take to get that in? How many iterations are possible? The sound, right? What kind of sound? What are the characteristics of that sound? Are they deep? Are they loud? What are the animations? How are these poses being communicated? Clarity is the currency of design. The bigger the feature is, the more the clarity it needs, and the more costly it is to implement. So it's really important to have a benchmark to how you assess your features and how you visually communicate them to your players, right? So let's get into attack direction. This is something that's really essential in Ember Point, right? So notice over here we have a trail. And while that trail does communicate the direction, you might argue, okay, well, that trail looks fine. But sometimes when you're aiming it really close to the camera, it feels obstructed. And a lot of people might propose a solution where, okay, maybe we should increase the lifetime of this trail a little bit longer, but would we want to have a lingering trail remain on the screen for quite a while? I don't think so. We can do something else to communicate the attack direction, right? Now notice what it looks like here with sparks. I turned off the lighting just to ensure that we see how that direction is being communicated without any lighting, right? So you guys can see the sparks are there. They linger for a specific amount of time. They communicate the direction quite well. They don't stay for too long, right? And they're probably really, they place really well into the camera. Now, how do we complement that attack direction? We complement them with directional hit reactions, right? Notice here, the enemy reacts the same way as we perform the attacks, right? So look at those sparks as they fly across from that weapon. The trails kind of communicate the direction. It feels a little inconsistent when we have that same directional hit reaction playing. Now notice over here, when we hit the enemy and they actually react to the direction of the hit, there's a sense of weightiness to this. The direction is being complemented. It feels like you're landing that hit and it feels super crunchy and just delicious. The moment you land that hit, you just feel like it just has a sense of weight and crunchiness to it. Up next is how do we communicate progress, right? How do we tell players that they're doing good when we are, when we're beating the shit out of enemies, right? That's really, really important. So here's the thing that I did. To communicate damage progress and to communicate that the players are doing a good job is if they hurt the enemy enough, the enemy is going to start to bleed. They're going to drop decals onto the floor. You can see that over there. That motivates the player to continue their onslaught onto the enemy. So we're giving them that encouragement. Enemy's weakened. Look at that blood flowing through. That's all of your progress right there. You're doing such a great job. And it is a little bit terrifying, but I mean, it's combat design. That's what you want to do. You want to encourage players to kind of push forward and kind of feel the game, right? Now, up next is timing. This is one of my favorite executions that I had implemented, the Leon kick. Now, what the Leon kick is, it's based off of Resident Evil 4. In Resident Evil 4, if you shoot an enemy in the head and you stun them, there's a quick time event that's going to pop up. And if you're up close, you're able to kick enemies in the face with Leon. And over here, if you get an enemy to a certain threshold while they're in the air and you press the execution button, you're able to kick them away from you. Now, here's why I talk about timing. I want you to look at these two examples. The first example is where no timing is considered, and the second example is when timing is considered. Notice the difference right there, right? So the first difference, it feels a little too slippery. There's not much power being generated into the hit. It doesn't feel like the power is being collected and shot out. But with the second one, you feel like the attack is generating at the startup. There's a little bit of generating power coming out, and it's being unleashed onto the enemy as it just propels them away from you, right? Now, what is that? It's called frame data. That's what we have to do, and it's terrifying, sure, but it's very important to learn. Frame data is quite important. Why are that? Number is important because it dials speed and the damage of an animation based on three important things: the anticipation, the attack, and the recovery. This is a determining factor behind why certain attacks are favored over other situations, right? So the anticipation is how long does it take to start the attack? The attack, how long does that attack take, right? How long is that window active? For the recovery is how long does it take for the player or the enemy to return back to position? If they're returning back to position, how long does it take for me to, approach them and land the attack? And when I say why are certain attacks favored over other situationally is you've probably had these moments where you're playing Souls likes where you've preferred using a heavy attack from a distance as the boss closes in on the distance from you, right? Because the heavy attack takes a long time to start up, so you perfectly land it as soon as the enemy kind of approaches you. So it helps you prioritize which attacks are permissible and which attacks don't seem permissible within certain situations. Now, up next is Gunplay. This is a very tough one for me because I just learned so many things along the way. I learned how to do game feel for Gunplay, and it was such an interesting and eye-opening experience. I made a lot of mistakes, and I do speak about these mistakes here. And the mistakes are still in the game, by the way. I don't know what the proposed solutions could be, so I'm just going to share them. Number one, we have a diegetic reticle. It's because we want to create relationships between the player character and the players themselves, right? So we didn't opt for a UI reticle. We wanted to feel like you were a part of the game as well. So there's that laser aim right there. It's very similar to how Dead Space and Resident Evil do it, right? We wanted to create that sense of relationship between you as a player and and the player character, Gravitas. Up next is keyframing the impact of a gunshot. How do we differentiate between the shot of a shotgun and the shot of a pistol, right? What I do here is I practically manipulate the position or the rotations of the bones in Engine in order for me to get the right feeling that I want. So that's what I do in Unreal Engine. I keyframe the impact of a gunshot from a pre-existing animation, and I try to match that uh, the poses to my liking. That right there is the animation for the wave gun. Up next is rate of fire and damage properties. How fast are you shooting per second? How does that feel? How much damage is that being, how much damage is being caused right over here? How do you balance both of those things out as well, right? The rate of fire determines the speed of how much you're firing. The damage properties also, how much damage is being chipped off of these enemies. And then we have aim assist. And for a game like this that encourages a combination of both melee attacks and gunplay, ranged combat, is you want to create a sense of balance between these two, and you want to create a sense of accessibility. You don't want too much precision with aiming when you're combo juggling enemies. For us to encourage that combination of both gunplay and melee combat, we want to ensure that gunplay complements the melee combat, and melee combat complements that gunplay. So over here, you can see that there's a sphere collision surrounding the enemy. What happens here is there's a trace that's being fired as you're aiming, and if that trace hits the enemy, it'll aim assist immediately. So say for an example, you're juggling the enemy within the air, and they're just within the air, and you're trying to hit them all across, and you aim, right? Say if you aim to the left or you aim to the right, there's a lot more leeway there. It'll auto target. It'll allow you to continue a combo off of a gunshot. So we try to give that accessibility. Now, if we remove that sphere and we consider the bounds of the mesh itself, that's when we get way too precise and we miss our shots. We want to make sure that these shots are being accounted for even outside of the mesh's boundaries. Aim canceling, right? So, like I mentioned, I talked about frame data, anticipation, attack, and recovery. Over here, what we're doing is we can cancel out of a heavy attack's recovery. So at the end of the animation of a heavy attack, we're able to press the aim button and we can cancel out of that attack to continue an aim or another attack. And we can combine our own attacks and just be strategic with what we want to prioritize. This is an example of aim canceling. We're aim canceling out of the second heavy attack. Now, up next, we have sound, which is so important. And I just wanted to say shout out to Donovan Robinson, who is an incredible audio designer. He currently works on Overwatch at Blizzard. He's one of the best teammates that I've ever worked with. We were constantly together, just really hashing it out, really trying to figure out what the right sounds were. As a combat designer, imitating sounds isn't enough. You need to be referencing other sounds to an audio designer. The characteristics of a sound are really hard to replicate, right? So what we had to do is we sat down together. We would have like maybe an hour and a half just listening to audio as we're testing together. He would give me the headphones, I'd give him back the headphones, we'd test, we'd play, we'd green light, we'd not green light, we discuss, we look back at documentation, and we see what seems to feel right and what doesn't feel right. Take a listen to this audio right over here. Pretty cool, right? All right. And now the final one is, well, you have melee combat and you have gunplay. How do you balance both of these things out, right? If you were in the middle of an encounter, how do you stop players from cheesing that enemy encounter and just causing them to spam shoot across, multiple areas and just really, cheese it out? Leave the arena with everybody being shot at from a distance and just, not encouraging them to use their melee combat. We dealt with that problem before. What was the solution? We have an overheat system. What that overheat system is basically at the bottom left of the screen, you're going to notice that there's a red bar. If you consistently keep using the wave gun, it'll overheat and it'll bar you from using it temporarily for approximately 5 to 6 seconds, right? And this bar, as it increases, it doesn't remain static. Over time, it actually reduces, right? And as you attack, it reduces a little bit more to encourage players to kind of combine between the two playstyles. So check this out. And it turns off. Now, cameras. Of course, everybody's least favorite thing. My least favorite thing. I don't like math. I don't like vectors. Sucks so much. Makes me tired. But it makes you guys tired too. So, camera dependent movement is tricky. With camera independent movement, you can freely rotate the camera around. You can snap targets a lot more easily. And with camera dependent movement is it's super hard. Like, the questions that are posed are what happens when you look at a different view and you attack? Will you attack at that location? How do you soft lock then? If the enemy is halfway into the camera, what happens then? How do you consider wall collisions then as you're switching between your gun and you're switching between regular combat, right? So here are the things that I came up with that I realized helped. One of them is controversial, but I would take your solutions. I would love to hear from you guys. Feedback is really great. So number one, players must face the camera view when attacking. Notice here, when I'm looking at a different location and I attack, I will look at that area right there. So you have full control over where your player character is attacking at. It's very, very essential to do this because you're allowing the player to kind of like steer the player character like a car, right? That sometimes that's called attack steering. Second is reorienting the camera and soft locking to the closest enemy. Now, this one is controversial, right? So, say for an example, if the enemy's right behind you and they're really close to you, the camera will actually reset and reorient itself behind the back of the player, and you're able to, lay on your onslaught on the enemy. Now, the reason why this is controversial is because it takes away a sense of player agency. What if the player just wanted to prioritize who was in front of them? Now, there was a lot of conflicting playtesting data on this. There are people that really preferred this, and then there are people that didn't prefer this. It was just kind of like a 50-50. So we kept it, and we decided that maybe we just want to allow players to kind of like whale in on it on enemies that are right behind them. Like we also didn't have enough time to kind of consider the option of turning that on or off within the widget. Or within our UI UX or main menu or options. So yeah, that was what we opted for. But now that I think about it, we could have done this a little bit better. We could have offered a lot more player agency. Prioritizing executions based on health parameters, distance, and angle. So how do you prioritize between these three executable enemies that are within close distance? So we calculate the health parameters, which one's at the lowest health, which one's at the closest distance, which one is at the right angle, and then we prioritize that enemy. And then there's camera wall detection. This is accompanying both aiming and attacking. So what happens when you're at a wall, right? How do you ensure that the gun is not being obstructed too much? How do you ensure that you're in proper aim view when you're hitting the wall, right? It's very, very essential to have that. And notice there's a small little cute detail. If you pay attention to the companion, right, the companion is also going to rotate a tad slight bit. So check this out. It's pretty cool. See that? Tilted. But yeah. Now up next are enemies. This is a great one. So What's so important about designing enemies is considering the player's kit, right? You have to consider the abilities and the options that are available for the player. In Ember Point, we have the Gust and the Lance. The Gust fumigates fires and exposes enemy weak points. The Lance acts as a simple bullet. It destroys weak points, and it opens up doors where weak points are located. Those weak points are called pustules. You have melee attacks. You have your regular medium attacks, and you have your heavy attacks. And then you have your dodging, which is basically just avoiding enemies. Now, what's so essential about this in terms of enemies is you need to build repertoire, right? God of War does this really, really well. And the way it does it is through these signifiers. You have the blue signifier indicating that you can interrupt an attack. You have a yellow signifier indicating that you can parry an attack. Then you have a red signifier that tells you that the attack cannot be interrupted. But you can also do this through level objects as well, right? So you can build player repertoire through levels in order for players to kind of navigate enemy encounters, right? So with fire, you allow players to create that relationship. What does gust do? What does a wind projectile do? Wind can fumigate the fire, and then you have the pus door. It's like this globule thing, right? It's about to pop and explode. You can use your lance to destroy it, right? And I did a lot of tech design. I did some technical design for the level designers. They requested these tools, and it was really interesting. I also did the shader work on that pustule. It was really really fun, really goopy, and a lot of the people on the team enjoyed it. And it was pretty fun to work on. So you notice here some of these level objects. One of these level objects is very apparent, right? When you're low on resources and you don't have enough time to come up with character designs or proper silhouetting for your enemies to kind of indicate what should be done, you can use the least resources possible to make that happen. Right over here, we're encouraging the lance with the pustule, and right in the middle, you can see that Udar, the enforcer enemy archetype, has that pustule on them. They're glowing red. There's that color language right there. It seems like it's about to explode, so you have to use your gun in order for you to kind of avoid it. Then you have these Horus, who are the fodder archetypes that encourages all playstyles, right? So they're that kind of enemy archetype that just allows you to use whatever you want and encourages you to use everything that you want. Finally, we have Vulcan, our boss, which is a hybrid of enforcement and expression. And I'll elaborate what that means shortly. So here's these Oharis right over here. Notice over here, I aim, right? And they avoid that, and then they jump into the air, and then you can shoot them, and you can continue off the combo. And the reason why we made the Zoharis commit to this one attack where they leap into the air is because, number one, if they leap into the air, you're able to shoot them. That's kind of like an indicator right there. There's like that small little particle effect that shows that they're in the air, so you can aim at them and just shoot them. You can also continue the combo and just stop them and interrupt them and juggle them right over here. So that's one way you can take care of the Zoharis. There's also another way you can do this, which is pretty cool, is rewarding people for using other playstyles against Zoharis, right? So if you use your Gust, you can expose a weak point. If you fire the Gust again, there's this massive AoE that comes up that knocks other enemies away within the arena, right? So it's a pretty cool little thing that I thought was really essential is maybe we want to make this feel better by rewarding players for using other playstyles. We want to reward players to explore this combat system a little bit more. So when they do that, it's just like, oh, that was fucking cool. I want to do that again. Um, Up next is Udar, the Enforcer. So you see over there is crawling straight at you, just on all fours, and it's rushing towards you. It's about to explode, and if you attack it, it's just going to knock you away. It enforces you to use your gun. And like I said, we're going back to those level objects and just kind of building that repertoire. Now, what happens if we use the enforced playstyle against the Saharas, right? We reward players as well because players want that, right? If I'm going to just give them a subpar result, right, or a subpar conclusion to using the enforced playstyle, then they're just going to feel like this enemy is a slug. Oh God, I got to use this attack again. Their death just means nothing to me right now. I have to work my way for nothing. But if you work your way for something, it has to feel good. It has to do something. So you really need to reward people for using the enforced playstyle. Up next is Vulcan, who is the hybrid, right? So he combines both of those properties where he encourages all the playstyles right over here. You can see this. I'm here, I'm attacking the enemy and the boss in any way that I can. The initial prototype of this boss battle actually had like this cloak around it, this fire cloak that stopped you from attacking him, and you had to use your gust mode at the start of the boss battle. That just kind of felt like you're enforcing them at the start. If you're working your way up towards a boss battle, the boss battle is a test of skill, so you need to kind of encourage those playstyles altogether. You need to kind of allow players to also be on the offensive as much as they possibly can, right? Now, here's the thing. We need to reward people for using an enforced playstyle during specific situations. For bosses, right? So the playstyle is maximized, but it's also minimized during key attacks to test the player's progress. So we're not having this attack, or we're not enforcing the player to play a very specific way throughout the majority of the boss battle. We sort of put the player on their toes during an attack so they can be like, ah, okay, I figured that out. I know that. Let's pull that off. I can see that. That silhouette right over there. The fires. I can see that. He does that thing. If the fires are right there, I've done that in the previous. I've done that in the level initially. So that means that I have to use the fumigation. I can see the pustules there. I have to use my lance. So that's really essential. Let's go ahead and add a cherry on top to the boss battle, right? So how do we make this boss battle feel a lot better? We want players to kind of feel like they're also controlling the battle space. So over here, you notice that Vulcan can actually clear enemies within the arena. So if you're being aggroed by a bunch of enemies, you can manipulate the boss's position, or you can manipulate the boss's attacks so he can accidentally attack the enemies in his way. So we do that in order for players to kind of clear the arena by depending on the boss as well. So there's like kind of like that mixture. Oh, I need a little bit of downtime. I'm gonna go to the corner. I'm gonna let the boss do a little stomp over here and collect all these enemies within the vicinity. That way they can, that way these enemies can chip the boss can chip the health of the enemies away, and that's just, that's the cherry on top. You're manipulating the boss's position to obliterate its companions, and it's such a cool thing. And I got this inspiration from the ogre encounter in God of War 2018, which is one of my favorite encounters ever. Now, final tidbit before we show gameplay. Only implementing combat features isn't enough. Job as a combat designer is to solve problems. So ask yourself if your features solve problems your team is facing. How are they conveyed to your players? How are they prioritized? And finally, how do they complement your enemies? Deconstruct, analyze, reconstruct, then iterate. Very essential. Let's go ahead and show you guys the gameplay video of Vulcan. Awesome. So that is the end of this talk or discussion. Thank you so much for coming out here and listening to me yap about this project. It was a real big challenge. I hope many of you have learned from this. Like I said, there are some mistakes in here that I might have not been able to track down
If you want to call them out, let me know. Give me some feedback. I really do love the feedback, and it's greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. The next slide will show my contact information. You can reach out to me personally, or you can email me. So yeah, thank you.